My father was a billionaire, and he sued me over $20 a month. I laughed when he first asked for it. I thought it was a joke. But 3 years later, that $20 would cost me more than I could ever pay. Our elders say, when a matter reaches the village square, it is no longer small. This is the story of a father, a son, and $20 that destroyed us before it saved us. I still remember the day my father called me, 3 years after I'd moved to New York. His voice sounded different. Older. Quieter. He asked me for something I never expected. $20 a month. I actually laughed. Not because I thought it was funny, but because it was so absurd. My father, Richard Morrison, was a billionaire. His name was on buildings. His companies employed thousands. He could buy anything, anyone, anywhere. And he was asking me, his son, fresh out of college, barely making ends meet in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, for $20 a month. I said, "Dad, are you serious? You don't need my money." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Jonathan, I'm not asking because I need it. I'm asking because you need to give it. $20. Every month. On the first. Can you do that for me?" I didn't understand it then. But I said yes. Because it was $20. How hard could it be? By the time I walked into that courtroom, I had no idea that the smallest amount of money in my life would become the most expensive lesson I'd ever learn. That 3 years later, my father would take me to court over it. That a judge would look at both of us and ask a question that would shatter everything I thought I knew about family, about love, about what it means to show up for someone. Why would a billionaire father sue his own son over pocket change? Why would he make it public, humiliating, unavoidable? And what could $20 a month possibly mean to a man who earned millions while he slept? What I didn't know then was that this wasn't a lawsuit. It was my father's last attempt to reach me. By the time I walked out of that courtroom, I would understand something that no inheritance, no trust fund, no amount of wealth could ever teach me. But first, I had to lose everything I thought I knew. For the first year, I was faithful. Every first of the month, I'd send $20 to his account. Sometimes I'd add a message. "Here's this month's payment, Dad. Hope you're well." Sometimes I'd just send it without a word. He never responded to the transfers. Never acknowledged them. I assumed that meant he was satisfied. That this strange little ritual we'd created was working, whatever it was supposed to do. But then life got busy. I got promoted at work. Started traveling for client meetings. I met Sarah, a lawyer who worked in corporate litigation. We started dating seriously. I had dinners to attend, weekends to plan, a life that felt full and exciting and entirely my own. And slowly, without even noticing it, I started forgetting. The first time I missed a payment, it was February. I was in Chicago for a conference, and the first of the month came and went. I remembered on the 3rd and sent it then, 2 days late. My father didn't say anything. The next month, I remembered on the 5th. Then the 10th. Then I started missing entire months. I'd remember randomly, sometimes weeks late, and send $40 or $60 at once to make up for it. I thought that was fine. I thought the amount was what mattered, not the timing. I didn't understand that the whole point was the rhythm. The routine. The monthly remembering. Slowly, I stopped sending the $20. Months slipped by. I told myself I was busy, that it didn't matter. But the truth was, I'd stopped thinking about him at all. My father never called to remind me. Never sent a text asking where the payment was. Never mentioned it during our brief, awkward phone calls on his birthday or Christmas. His silence should have told me something. But I took it as permission. Permission to forget. Permission to let it slide. Permission to prioritize everything and everyone else. Meanwhile, my father's life was changing in ways I didn't see. He'd started slowing down at work. Handed over more responsibilities to his executives. He spent more time at home, in that big, empty house where my mother used to laugh and cook and fill the rooms with warmth. He was alone. And I was too busy to notice. By the 3rd year, I'd stopped sending the $20 entirely. I hadn't sent a single payment in over 8 months. I didn't think about it anymore. It had faded into the background of my life, like an expired gym membership or a New Year's resolution I'd abandoned. I assumed my father had forgotten too, or that he'd realized how ridiculous the whole thing was and let it go. I was wrong. One Tuesday evening in September, I came home from work and found an envelope taped to my apartment door. Thick paper. Official seal. I opened it standing right there in the hallway, my briefcase still in my hand. It was a court summons. Richard Morrison versus Jonathan Morrison. Plaintiff claims breach of verbal contract. Defendant failed to make agreed-upon monthly payments of $20. Total amount in arrears, $160. 8 months of missed payments. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From anger. From humiliation. My father had taken me to court. My own father. Over $160. Over missed payments I'd honestly forgotten about. I called him immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I texted him. Dad, what is this? Why would you do this? No response. I called his office. His assistant said he was unavailable. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Panic. And underneath it, something worse. Shame. I told Sarah about it that night. She was sitting on the couch, her laptop open, reviewing case files. When I showed her the summons, she looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. Jonathan, your father is a billionaire. This isn't about money. I snapped at her. Then what's it about? Humiliating me? Proving some point? What kind of father does this? She closed her laptop. The kind who's tried everything else. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to think about what she was implying. That this was somehow my fault. That I'd pushed him to this. I wanted to be angry. I wanted him to be the villain. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to look, I knew she was right. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. I thought about ignoring it. I thought about hiring a lawyer to make it go away quietly. I thought about sending him the $160 and a letter telling him to leave me alone. But I didn't do any of those things. Because despite my anger, despite my humiliation, I needed to understand. I needed to hear him say it. Why? The courthouse was in Lower Manhattan, an old building with marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo. I arrived 15 minutes early. My father was already there, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my rent. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older. His hair was grayer, his shoulders less broad. When he saw me, he didn't smile. Didn't stand. Just nodded once, like I was a business associate he vaguely recognized. That hurt more than I expected. We didn't speak. We just sat there, 10 feet apart, waiting for our names to be called. I could hear my own heartbeat in the quiet hallway. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask him why he was doing this, why he couldn't just talk to me like a normal person. But the words stuck in my throat. Because I knew the answer. He had tried talking to me. 3 years ago, when he asked for $20 a month. And I'd agreed, then slowly, quietly, stopped listening. At this point I hated him. Be honest, would you have felt the same? When they called our case, we walked into a small courtroom. Plain wooden benches. Fluorescent lights. A judge who looked tired and slightly annoyed, like this was the least important thing on his docket. There were maybe a dozen people in the gallery. Other plaintiffs and defendants waiting for their cases. A court reporter. A bailiff standing by the door. The judge read the case number and details aloud. Richard Morrison versus Jonathan Morrison. Plaintiff alleges breach of verbal contract. Defendant failed to make agreed-upon monthly payments of $20 over a period of 8 months. Total amount owed, $160. Someone in the back of the room laughed. Not loud, but audible. The kind of laugh that escapes before you can stop it. The judge looked up sharply, and the room went silent. He turned to my father. Mr. Morrison, I have your financial disclosures here. You're a wealthy man. Very wealthy. Is this amount correct? $160? My father stood. His voice was calm. Steady. The same voice that had negotiated billion-dollar deals. Yes, Your Honor. That's correct. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying my father like he was trying to solve a puzzle. The judge's eyes bored into both of us. He leaned forward like he already knew this wasn't about money and was waiting to hear which one of us was lying. Sir, I'm going to be frank with you. I see cases in this courtroom every day. People fighting over rent they can't pay. Medical bills that have destroyed their lives. And you're here over $160. Money you clearly don't need. So I'll ask you directly, what are we really doing here? My father didn't hesitate. We're here because my son made me a promise. And he broke it. The judge looked at me. Is that true? I stood up, my throat tight. Your Honor, I forgot. I got busy. I meant to send the money, but life got in the way. It's $20. I didn't think it was that important. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. My father's face didn't change, but something in his eyes dimmed. The judge was quiet for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He set down his gavel and leaned forward. Young man, when was the last time you visited your father? I blinked. I'm sorry, what? It's a simple question. When was the last time you saw your father? In person. Not a phone call. Not a text message. When did you last sit in the same room with him? I tried to think. Christmas? No, I'd spent last Christmas with Sarah's family in Connecticut. Thanksgiving? I'd flown to Miami with friends. His birthday? I'd sent a card. I don't remember exactly, I said. Maybe last year? Maybe longer. I've been busy with work and... The judge held up his hand. I didn't ask for excuses. I asked for a date. I didn't have one. The silence in that courtroom was suffocating. The judge turned back to my father. Mr. Morrison, I think you and I both know this case isn't about $160. So why don't you tell your son, and this court, why we're really here? My father stood again. And for the first time since I'd walked into that courthouse, he looked directly at me. Really looked at me. Your Honor, 3 years ago, I asked my son for $20 a month. Not because I needed the money. I didn't ask for money. I asked for attention. For a small reminder that I mattered. Every month. Just once. 30 seconds was enough. On the first of every month, when he's planning his expenses, when he's thinking about what matters, I wanted him to stop, even for 30 seconds, and remember that I exist. That I'm still here. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. For the first year, he did. Every month, the payment arrived. Sometimes with a message. Sometimes without. But it arrived. And every time I saw that notification on my phone, I knew my son was thinking of me. Even if it was just for the time it took to send $20. That was enough. He paused. Then he started forgetting. First a few days late. Then a week. Then entire months would go by. I never called to remind him. I wanted to see if he'd remember on his own. If I still mattered enough to occupy space in his mind without me begging for it. My chest tightened. And for the last 8 months, nothing. No payment. No call. No visit. I tried reaching out. I called. I texted. He was always too busy. Always had somewhere else to be. So I realized something, Your Honor. My son will ignore a phone call. He'll skip a holiday. He'll forget a promise. But he cannot ignore a court summons. The room was completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. A courtroom is one of the few places left in this world where presence is mandatory. My father's voice broke, just slightly. I didn't bring my son here for $160. I brought him here because it's the only way I could guarantee he'd show up. Because the money arrived when he remembered. But my son never did. I felt something hot behind my eyes. Tears I hadn't cried in years. The judge was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice softer than before. Mr. Morrison, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to pay the outstanding amount of $160. He looked at me. But I'm going to tell you something off the record, young man. Your father didn't sue you because he's cruel. He sued you because he's desperate. Desperate to be seen. Desperate to matter to the one person whose opinion actually counts. You can write him a check today and walk out of here legally satisfied. But you'll still owe him a debt this court can't measure. He picked up his gavel. Case dismissed. The bang echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. People shuffled out slowly, moving on to the next case, the next conflict, the next broken relationship in a city full of them. I sat there, frozen. My father stood and walked toward the exit. He passed right by me without a word. I wanted to call out to him. I wanted to apologize. But my voice wouldn't work. I paid the $160 that afternoon. Direct transfer. I stared at the confirmation screen for a long time. Then I sat in my apartment and did something I should have done years ago. I thought about my father. Really thought about him. I thought about the house he lived in. The same house where my mother used to sing while she cooked. The same house that used to be filled with laughter and warmth and life. Now it was just him. Alone. Eating meals at a table set for one. I thought about the phone calls I'd ignored. The holidays I'd skipped. The birthdays I'd acknowledged with generic cards bought at drugstores on my way home from work. I thought about $20 a month. Such a small thing. Such an easy thing. And I'd failed at it. Not because I couldn't afford it. Not because I didn't have time. But because I'd stopped thinking he mattered. I'd inherited his wealth, his name, his opportunities. But I'd abandoned his heart. A week later, I drove to his house. I didn't call ahead. Didn't text. I just showed up. When he opened the door, he looked surprised. His hair was uncombed. He was wearing a sweater I remembered from my childhood, old and fraying at the edges. "Jonathan? I came to visit," I said. He stepped aside slowly, like he didn't quite believe I was real. The house looked the same. Immaculate. Expensive. And so empty. We sat in the living room. The same room where my mother used to read to me before bed. Where she'd sit with my father on Sunday mornings, drinking coffee and doing crossword puzzles. Now it was just silent. For a while neither of us spoke. Then I said, "I'm sorry." He looked at his hands. They were older than I remembered. Veins more prominent. Skin thinner. "For what?" "For forgetting. For disappearing. For making you take me to court just to see me." He nodded slowly. "I didn't want to do that. But I didn't know what else to do. I tried everything else. You could have just told me you were lonely." He smiled, but it was sad. "Would you have listened?" I didn't have an answer. Because we both knew the truth. "I called you, Jonathan. Many times. You were always busy. Always somewhere else. So I stopped calling. Because I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be the needy father chasing his son for scraps of attention. I wanted you to come because you wanted to, not because I guilt you into it." "The $20, I said. "Why that specifically?" He looked at me. "Because it was small enough that it wouldn't hurt you. You could afford it even when you were just starting out. But it was regular. Once a month. I thought if I could just get you to think of me once a month, maybe that would grow into more. Maybe you'd call. Maybe you'd visit. Maybe that small thread would keep us connected." His voice dropped. "But you forgot. And I realized I wasn't even worth $20 of your attention." I broke then. Right there in my father's living room. I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my mother's funeral. Because he was right. I'd had everything. Freedom. Opportunity. Success. And I'd used all of it to run away from the one person who'd given it to me. My father didn't say anything. He just sat there, letting me break. After a while he said, "I don't want your money, Jonathan. I never did. I just wanted you." From that day on I visited. Not every week at first. But regularly. Tuesdays became our day. I'd drive out to his house after work. Sometimes we'd have dinner. Sometimes we'd just sit and watch old westerns on TV, the kind my mother used to complain about. We didn't talk about the lawsuit. We didn't need to. The message had landed. And slowly, carefully, we started rebuilding something I didn't even know we'd lost. I learned things about my father I'd never known. That he played piano badly, but he played it anyway when he couldn't sleep. That he volunteered at a youth center in the Bronx, teaching kids about business and finance. That he kept every card I'd ever sent him, even the lazy ones, in a drawer in his office. That after my mother died, he'd thought about selling everything and moving somewhere quiet. But he stayed because he thought I might need him someday. And he wanted to be there when I finally figured it out. I told him about my life too. Really told him. About Sarah. About work. About my fears and doubts and the pressure I felt living in his shadow. He listened. He didn't try to fix everything. He just listened. And that was enough. I started sending the $20 again. First of every month. Not because he asked, but because I wanted to. It became a reminder. A ritual. A way of saying I remember you. You matter. I'm still here. And every month, without fail, he'd text me back. Just 2 words. Received. Thanks. It was the smallest thing. But it meant everything. 2 years after the lawsuit, my father had a heart attack. It was sudden. Massive. I was with him when it happened. We just finished dinner, pot roast, his favorite, the recipe my mother used to make. He said he was tired and went to lie down. An hour later, I found him. He was already gone. The funeral was enormous. Hundreds of people. Business partners. Politicians. Employees. People whose lives he changed with his money and his vision. Everyone who'd ever shaken his hand or signed a contract with him showed up. But when I stood up to give the eulogy, I didn't talk about Morrison Enterprises. I didn't talk about his buildings or his donations or his empire. I told them about the lawsuit. I told them about $20 a month. I told them how my father took me to court not because he was cruel, but because he loved me enough to fight for my attention when I wouldn't give it freely. People laughed. Some cried. And when I finished, I said this. My father was a billionaire. He had everything money could buy. But the only thing he really wanted was me. And I almost missed it. He didn't need my money. He needed me. He needed me to show up. And I almost didn't. I paused, looking out at all those faces. Don't wait for a court summons. Don't wait for a funeral. Show up now. While the people you love are still here to see it. After the funeral, I went through my father's things. In his office, on his desk, I found a folder. Inside were printed records of every $20 payment I'd ever sent him. Every single one. Even the late ones. Even the ones I'd sent in bulk to make up for months I'd forgotten. He'd kept them all. And on the last page, dated 2 weeks before he died, in his careful handwriting, he'd written, Jonathan remembered. Every month. He finally came back. Underneath, he'd added, worth every penny of the lawsuit. I sat there in his office, surrounded by photos of buildings he'd built and awards he'd won, and I cried. Because I understood. He didn't care about the money. He never did. He cared that I'd shown up. That I'd remembered. That in the last 2 years of his life, I'd finally chosen him. And that was worth more than everything else combined. I still send $20 on the 1st of every month. I send it to a youth scholarship fund he'd set up before he died. The Richard Morrison Memorial Fund. It goes to kids who've lost parents. Kids who need someone to show up for them. Every time I send it, I think of him. And I remember, presence is the only currency that matters. Time is the only inheritance you can't replace. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. If someone you love took you to court over $20, would you be angry? Or would you finally show up? Because here's what I learned the hard way. We think love is automatic. We think because we send money, because we text on birthdays, because we're family, that's enough. But it's not. My father didn't need my money. He needed me to sit at his table. To laugh at his terrible jokes. To be there on a random Tuesday for no reason other than I wanted to see him. And I almost missed it. I almost let him die alone, surrounded by wealth, but starving for the one thing money can't buy: connection. If there's someone in your life you've been meaning to visit, someone you've been too busy to call, don't wait. Don't wait for a crisis. Don't wait for a funeral. Show up now, while they're still here to see it. My father sued me for $20 a month. But what he really wanted was priceless. Some people wait for inheritance. Others wait for permission. I waited for a court summons, and I almost waited too long. Think about the person you've been ignoring. Call them today. Visit them this week. Don't wait for a court summons, or a funeral, to remind you what matters. How do you feel about this story? Have you ever let years slip by with someone who mattered? If this was you, would you have shown up sooner, or would you have needed the same painful wake-up call I did? Let us know in the comments. And if this story touched something in you, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our upcoming videos. Because some stories aren't just meant to entertain us. They're meant to change us. Before it's too late.